Yeah, I found the movie to be so engrossing and touching and heartfelt. Really powerful. So the movie provides a lot of valuable information, obviously, about OCD, this grossly misunderstood
Yeah,
mental health
yeah.
condition. Um, and at the same time, your movie is a movie. You have characters, you have story, things like that. So how did you strike that balance between telling an audience valuable information about OCD while also, um, I guess, not feeling like you were lecturing the audience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was sort of the name of the game with the film was I wanted it to be a true to life experience because I was looking around and did my research, and I really couldn't, at least maybe it's out there, but I really wasn't able to find something that was a very true, accurate depiction of what this condition looks like. Everything was as good as it gets, or Monk, or OCD is always kind of depicted as like kind of the quirky side character or something. So I did want to do that, but first and foremost, I'm a filmmaker and I'm a screenwriter, and um, and I wanted to show a lot more than that. I wanted to show people that don't have OCD. I wanted there to be a lot of things in there that they would be able to take away as well. And I also wanted to have it be more cohesive, and I wanted it to be a ensemble approach to mental health, and not just show the sufferer, but kind of show all the people in one's life and how it affects everyone. So I think the idea and the concept itself kind of lent itself to a giving a greater purview to this story with more people and different perspectives. So that structure was in there from the beginning. In terms of the execution of how it was balanced, I mean, that's just kind of the craft of how it is, and that was just sort of where the rubber meets the road when I was writing it. But that approach was there from the beginning.
Yeah, and that ensemble definitely, comes across in the movie and also lends to a lot of the themes that the movie is dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, you talk about or you deal with mental health, grief, profound grief, substance use, these quite heavy themes, and yet the movie is set in this kind of almost idyllic California
Yeah.
sunshine.
Yep.
I'm curious what made you want to shoot a movie dealing with such heavy themes in such a kind of gorgeous, picturesque setting.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that is. I mean, um, I live in LA. I've lived here. I'm from here basically. I grew up in my parents were divorced. My father was in the South Bay and like Hermosa, and I was raised. And my mother was down in Orange County, and I grew up down in Laguna Beach. And I've been in LA my whole life. So it was right what you know. Also, the film's pretty autobiographical, and I'm in LA. Also, it was a COVID movie, and I was writing it, and it was like, oh, I was looking for something to make in my backyard. And I love LA movies. I love films like Shampoo, and films like The Long Goodbye, and sort of these films that you just have the lead character and he's just kind of going around LA, and he's always in different parts of the city, and it's not like he's in one neighborhood the whole time. I love how he's. So I really wanted to do something like that. And already the locations themselves sort of provided that in terms of
Hmm.
being out in Malibu and being in Topanga and Hollywood and Venice. And I love films like that where you're going around LA. As an Angelino, I enjoy that. So I don't know if I had a conscious decision to make to juxtapose those two worlds like you spoke to
Hmm.
make this sort of like sunshiny LA film with these kind of heavier themes. Um, I think it also helped because I wanted it. It's obviously dealing with heavy themes, but I hope that the story itself is very self aware, and that I was self aware as a filmmaker to where I wanted it to be dealing with heavy themes, but I didn't want it to be bleak, and I didn't want it to have the tone of it be that. I wanted it to be more human than that, and to sort of be bittersweet, and to say that this is life. And um, I think that it's not just the bleak. I think that there's moments of touching human connection, and not and little pieces of comedic relief sprinkled in. And I tried to stay self-aware as a craftsman when I was writing it, and also while I was directing and editing it, to if it ever felt like it was staying too bleak for too long or too heavy for too long, that that there was something in there to show that as filmmakers we were kind of self-aware. You could trust us that we weren't just gonna keep you down just to keep you down. We were gonna
Right.
be self-aware in that sense.
Yeah, and that sense of bleak doesn't come across in the movie at all, and it kind of reminds me of the beginning
Oh,
of
good.
the movie in which Cooper is being told he thinks he has depression, right? And he's being told
Right.
like, no, you don't have depression, and it's interesting that the movie tonally doesn't go in that route as well.
Yes, yeah, I definitely set it up as if you think it may, and that's intentional.
Yeah, it definitely comes
Yeah.
across. I did want to ask you about this feeling of authenticity with the movie. I know that um, a lot of the actors in the movies are actors, but some are non-actors as well, including people who are actually suffering with OCD. Do you mind speaking a
Mhm.
little bit about why you think it was important, or why you wanted to go out of your way to incorporate real people in your story?
Sure. Well, naturalism was the name of the game with this project, and so I wanted to lean into that and embrace that as much as possible. And I love filmmakers like Lynn Ramsey and the Safdie brothers, and um, just this sense of mixing in actors and non-actors. If you're going for naturalism, I think
Hmm.
it depends on the story you're telling, but for this particular story, it was twofold. I wanted to have an extreme sense of naturalism, so I think that when you have actors and you mix them in with non-actors, hopefully the aesthetic that you get when you're watching it as a viewer is you don't quite know where the acting's starting
Hmm.
and the real life is, and it creates just kind of like a muddied experience that's hopefully something that you're never even aware of and becomes kind of invisible, and it just
Hmm.
feels like real life. And also, I knew that the condition being so misunderstood, that it would be nice to have people on set for all of my actors that don't suffer from OCD or mental health, um, to have them there as a resource,
Hmm.
in real time as we were shooting the scene, and it turned into that. I suffer from OCD, obviously, so I'm there, and then I have actors that are there, so and then real life patients that are there, so it just created a dialogue on set that was great. And
Hmm.
you just naturally, even when we were in between takes, asking questions, sharing stories. Oh, I remember in groups this, remember in groups with that, and just kind of sharing intimate stories to give people that perspective and to give my actors the tools that they needed to perform.
And I imagine that must have countered a lot of the unfortunate stigma around OCD and the misunderstanding of, I think even the movie talks about, I don't wash my hand, I don't wash my hands
Right,
when I'm not
right.
checking. So,
I
um,
hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
yeah, so to give you a little background, so in addition to being like talking about movies, I'm also a clinical psychologist in training.
Oh,
So I have my
wow.
master's degree in clinical psychology and I'm getting my PhD right now.
That's
And
quite the
so
cross section that you have going on there.
yeah. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about that side of things. If you think that this movie would have utility or I guess I guess what I'm trying to say is that this movie provided a depth of understanding that I don't think a textbook could ever really convey.
Right,
And
right.
so did you keep that in mind, or did you have that in mind that maybe this will help people, maybe not therapists in training, but maybe help people help others with OCD, if that makes
Oh,
sense?
honestly, Josh, 1000%. That's why I made the film. This is an autobiographical story. I went through it, and not to be too pretentious or something about it, but this was my form of activism in terms of you want to
Mm,
plug in with how you know how. Um, I'm an artist, so I wanted to. How can I figure out how to give back to this community? I'm not seeing anything that's represented. I also think that there's enough here to make this a universal story that's going to appeal
mm,
to everybody and have things. But how can I be a little subversive, and how can I really stay true to give a truly accurate depiction that I obviously, it's my own experience. I consulted therapists about it. I had them read scripts. I made sure that I crossed my T's and dotted my I's about the things that maybe weren't my own experience, that I could make sure this was how it would be done. And I wanted that. I wanted somebody who's maybe been suffering in silence for maybe up to 5, 8 years to be able to watch a film like this and to maybe have that aha moment of,
Mm.
oh, this is kind of touching a nerve here. Maybe I have this, and not to diagnose them or something, but to
Right, right.
maybe have them be able to go to their therapist and say like, hey, I saw this movie. It's hitting kind of close to home. Do you think maybe this could be me?
Mm.
And so to help people was the number one thing of why I wanted to tell this particular story. And then once I wanted to tell it, obviously I want to make it as universal and entertaining as possible. But that was 100% my hope, is that I hope that this can be a therapeutic tool. Obviously I'm biased and it's my own experience, but I feel like if I'd hope that anybody with OCD that would see this film would see a version of themselves up on screen and would constantly throughout the movie say like, oh yeah, I've seen that in the groups, and oh my gosh, yes, and that. And I think that it's true as much as I was able to, and I strived for it to be that.
Yeah, I definitely can imagine someone who hasn't been diagnosed yet, and watching this movie and having that like aha moment you're talking about, of just
I
having
hope so. That would
relatability.
be the biggest thing for me, is if somebody was able to unlock that and save themselves years of suffering. That would make my day.
Yeah. And I guess really just kind of shows the power of cinema, that it kind of, it goes beyond just a 2 hour watch, right? That could be life changing. So,
Yeah.
um, I do appreciate the kind of universal story, and I think that's not something that we gloss over, the fact that the movie isn't just appealing to people who are familiar with OCD or suffering from OCD, but it's a universal tale, and like we talked about, touches on a lot of those themes. But as you mentioned, it is semi-autobiographical and touches on deeply personal things. I'm wondering, as you were going into this movie, as you were prepping it, if you had any reservations or concerns about making it so personal, and kind of what made you making a movie so personal, and what made you kind of make that jump to say, no, this is the movie I want to make.
No, not really. And I think it's because I kind of outlined the movie when I was kind of going through things, but I didn't make it at the time because it wasn't something that I needed to do to be cathartic or anything. I waited until I was kind of past everything and I was in a totally different place in my life and had processed everything, but I wanted to make it when it was still close enough where I could access it and sort of like
Hmm.
remember what it was like before it was just a kind of memory. Uh, so I started there, and then I casted a real life couple to play the leads intentionally, and I casted uh, the lead actress's parents are a real life couple that are older, and that's coupled with the non actors. And I was going for this sense of I didn't want it to be my story because that's not actionable. That doesn't help actors. So I wanted the actors to then really to mind their own experience. And as a real life couple, when whatever the couple's fighting or the couple's in it, it's more like, how do you guys fight?
Hmm.
Like I really wanted to, in the casting process, I talked to them about being courageous and about how I was going to really ask a lot of them, and really, sure, it was my own distillation of my own experience that got put onto the page, but now I'm handing it off to human beings that need to make it their own.
Right.
So where so I encourage them to pull as much from their own experience as possible. So when we were there and we were making it, it didn't always feel like, oh, here, this is my life or whatever
Hmm.
that we're doing it. I didn't want it to feel that. I thought that it would be more interesting for these different voices to come in and say, well, how are you guys in a relationship? Because I think that coupling of me putting it on the page of this is how my relationship was, then you guys put it on, act how your relationship, like there'll just be some truth in here and some authenticity that will come through ultimately from that. So it was a film that in general, I guess, was more about the process of that than sort of, I mean, I was there if any actors had any questions about like, hey, kind of like, how was this, or what was this thing? But I would kind of give a short answer, and I would try to kind of deflect and say, well, that's just kind of how it was for me. But like, what do
Hmm.
you've probably been in a similar situation in a relationship, or how do you react? How do you fight? How do you love? How do you do all of these things? So it became kind of an amalgamation of my own experience and the actor's experience. So for me, it made that process, I guess, a little less front of mind. I didn't feel as though so much that it was like, here's my story on the screen.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to what you mentioned earlier in regards to how universal the movie is. Do you
Right.
mind if I ask one other question? I know that
Of
you hit the
course. Yeah. Yeah.
question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Um, I was really intrigued by the way that you started the movie, so that kind of flash forward and that exposure, honestly reminded me of a horror movie. And there
Mm,
are other aspects in the movie, particularly around the exposures, that are horrifying. They're horrifying, and they're you know you're conveying not just the torment of OCD, but the horror of OCD. So I'm
right.
curious if you kind of if that was intentional, that you were kind of going for the horror that Cooper was experiencing with those exposures.
Yeah, it was because I think that I was self-aware about it, and I think I wanted to play with audience expectations. And I think that making a horror film out of these themes and these thought processes is probably the easy way that people would probably lean into the subject matter. So I just wanted to start it with that tone to obviously get people looking at it a certain way, and then I wanted to be able to flip their perspective within the viewing of the film and be like, oh right, maybe it's not what I thought it was. And I wanted to use sort of the stigmas that we have, to my advantage as a filmmaker.
mm.
So that's why I did that. I wanted to play with audience expectations in a way that I hope is enjoyable when you watch the film.
Yeah, no, definitely enjoyable, and it really kind of grabs you right away.
Right.
Yeah, right off the bat. No, thank you so much for being able to speak with me.